Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The New Buyer's Journey, How to Grow Pipeline Through Real Intent and Context. My name's Jake Randall. I'm the COO at Common Room, and I'll be your host today. And I'm excited to be joined by Kevin Van Gundy, the COO at Vercel, and Will Allred, the COO at Lavender, for a discussion about the changes we're seeing in the market and how we're guiding our teams to deliver customer value and drive more pipeline to hit our goals. So I'll start with you, Kevin, since you're on the left side of my screen. Tell us a bit about yourself and Vercel.
Yeah, well, it's great to be here. I'm excited to chat with you all. We were riffing earlier about how rare it is to get a bunch of COOs together because it's an interesting role. But yeah, so my name's Kevin Van Gundy. I'm the COO here at Vercel. I've been with Vercel since 2019. And for those that aren't yet familiar with Vercel, we describe ourselves as the front end cloud, where we make it easier for developers to build great applications, at the moment in which they're inspired by an idea. We serve indie developers with through some of the largest sites in the world. And then some fun stats, our network processes, 100 billion requests per week. We over the last 24 months, 150 million deployments have been created on Vercel's platform. And I live just outside San Francisco in San Bruno. And my dog Juno may make a guest appearance at some point in the webinar. She's a large Bernese Mountain Dog. So yeah, great to be here.
Thanks, Kevin. Awesome. And then Will, another COO.
Yeah, I'm hoping the dog makes a guest appearance. Mine's off sleeping on the right. If you hear him snoring in the background, I apologize. So I'm one of the co-founders and COO at Lavender. Very simply, we help sellers write emails that you'd actually want to read and respond to. And so at this point, we've analyzed just about 100 million emails, and across the emails that our users are sending out, which is millions per week, the average reply rate is over 20%. And so, so we're having a lot of success in what we're doing. Just pulling out and showcasing to people what it means to actually write a high quality, personalized message.
I love that. I feel I wish more people use your technology. Maybe I'd get less terrible emails in my inbox.
It's a problem everyone can relate to.
Exactly. Cool. Well, just quickly, I'm Jake Randall. I also have a dog. So maybe we'll just do a dog party at the end. I'm the COO here at Common Room. Common Room essentially helps folks interact with their prospects, their customers, really anyone who's interested in your space and better understand that digital relationship that you have with them. And so what we've seen is that folks are more and more interacting across these new channels and using your product, and how can you help understand the way that your buyers want to buy and what they care about. So with that, maybe quickly, since Kevin kind of mentioned it, why don't we go around the horn, define what a COO is at your company? Because I think that's something that maybe not the topic of the day, but it's unique, as you said, Kevin, to have three of us on one call. So we might as well go through it and give someone a little extra.
Yeah. There. Oh man. But and what else is my guess is that all three of our roles are going to be slightly different in its own way. And so I guess as a quick summary of my role at Vercel. So I'm generally speaking, I'm responsible for the business half for Vercel. So finance, go to market, our sales team, marketing team, BD, all those pieces, CS, and then our HR functions. What's been really fun is the way in which my role has gotten to evolve over time at the company. Guillermo, our founder and CEO, has been a really great partner where he has essentially given me a lot of responsibility to say, hey, how do we go out and build a really great business behind this extraordinary product? And so I assume kind of where we're going to go with a lot of this conversation is the fun thing about the CEO role is that it's always running relief to the CEO, both in terms of what the company in terms of personality needs, but also in terms of what the business needs in that given week or month. And so that's a quick bit of a mandate, and very happy to kind of pull apart kind of the way in which I ended up here.
We'll probably focus more on the go-to-market side of your job, less on the HR side.
Thank goodness.
And then Will, just quickly.
Yeah. Like an interesting follow-up question for Kevin before I jump in. Kevin, is your CEO, is he more of like the technical founder type persona?
Oh, he's actually done both really well, which has been fun. When we first met back in 2019, like I think deep in his heart, he's like, I'm an engineer first. I happen to run a really large business, and then it's been really fun again as our partnership has grown. Him kind of stepping in like, hey, I'm also doing the kind of traditional CEO work, being a great people leader. And so I always feel bad when like oh, like Guillermo's the product CEO. I'm like, no, he's both.
Yeah.
You know, he leads the thing.
Yeah. So I love that because I think about it from my perspective. I'm one of three co-founders. So I've been in since the early days. And I think of my role similar to you, Kevin, in the sense that it's evolved rapidly from kind of just being a co-founder and doing everything to now being a part of a scaling organization. And it's an interesting role of understanding how all the pieces come together. I sort of jokingly refer to what I do as an owner of few, but an enabler of many, where my job is to help make sure the team is as successful as they can possibly be in all the things that they do. So whether that's, on the go-to-market side, whether that's, marketing, sales, finance, HR, sort of like seeing where I can step in on the back end and be a helpful resource.
Yeah, it's funny. I was describing this to a CFO buddy of mine, where like your CEO tends to be like your strongest general manager, and it tends to be that human that you heave in front of whatever like the most urgent problem is in the company of like, hey, XYZ, leader has departed. This is now your new charter. Please go rebuild XYZ function. And so it's always fun getting to sometimes commiserate with other CFOs like, hey, like I know you have great stories. Tell them to me.
Yeah, I refer to those as the special projects.
Yeah. Long
Jake,
list of special projects.
yeah, Jake, I'm curious. Are you in the special projects budget bucket?
I don't think so. I think I have a pretty similar responsibilities to Kevin, actually. So I don't know if that's the actual definition of a COO, but at least in our two companies, that's how it works. And so, for Common Room, honestly, it's mostly focused on scaling the go-to-market org as we get going. But there's always things that come up, as we all know. That's the fun of working at a startup. So with that, let's maybe jump into maybe the meat of the conversation. I think those intros in terms of kind of looking across the different parts of the business are helpful context to kind of, for our first question, which is, what is the new buyer's journey, right? What's changing? What are you seeing out there in the world? And I see sorry, I'm going to quickly, before I get into that, this is a fun part of doing a live webinar. So Brady asked the question, how it relates to growing the pipeline. I think we all ultimately own the overall go-to-market success, right? And so, Kevin, you're talking about, you own sales, marketing, you own finance. How much do you want to invest into sales and marketing? And so I think the goal here is to, with that broad perspective, talk about what are we seeing changing? How are you looking at, what's happened since, 2019, Kevin, in your time was very different than 2023. And have you seen that buyer's journey change? And Will, obviously, you have great insights with really helping folks, with what I'd argue is one of the primary channels that folks have used for some time now. So with that, Kevin, go. What's changed? What's happening out there?
Go everything. It's 20
Yeah.
now. Gosh, like I'm trying like how to blitz through the summary. I think specifically at Vercel, one of the things that we watched happen both in terms of like the demand side, where again we help folks build great web applications, and watching organizations really put those web applications in like the pole position in terms of, when you talk to a CIO, you talk to a CTO, hey, what are the things that your board and your CEO are leaning on you? That digital transformation effort, I mean, I think has always been kind of like a trendy topic, but when retail brick and mortar shut down, we watched all that. And then I think the other half too is because we've moved to like highly distributed organizations, the like buying entity has become a lot more diffuse. And again, it's like it's fun being on a call with like both you from Common Room and Will from Lavender, in terms of like accessing those buying entities has become a lot more difficult, because it's no longer I can go drive down to San Francisco and meet with the entirety of the Slack team. They're sitting in 17 different cities now, and being able to actually engage with them and take them on an actual buying journey, or even just getting them into the pipeline, has become a lot more difficult. And so I think those are the two levers around. I think a lot of Vercel's hyper growth has been born out of one, they're like secular trends in the market that are making us very, very important to our buyers. And then two, very early on, having a distribution channel like an open source project, coupled with being thoughtful about the RevOps PLG motion that we've built. Those two things have given us a really large advantage over legacy large players, as well as our kind of adjacent competitors. I can pull that thread a whole lot more, but
yeah, no,
my Spark Notes like coverlet.
Yeah.
I think with our roles in general, right, we get a really broad view across the entire organization, which in a world where like for our product, it's PLG, right? And so understanding every aspect of how that buyer's journey comes together, when you start thinking about what to invest in, what's going to have the best impact as far as driving that overall pipeline, those overall results in the long term, it's a unique seat to get a lens at that. You're talking about the open source community that y'all have. I think about our version of that is the content that we put out. So early stages of our growth, it was me posting to LinkedIn that drove our quote unquote pipeline, right? And so it's just open sourcing and making available our insight when it comes to what does it mean to write quality email. So it's very similar in a lot of lenses.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think one of the stats, if people, trust the analysts like Gartner and whatnot, right? Gartner will tell you that your sales team or your sellers only have 5% of your buyer's time, right? And I think that's a little bit what you were saying, Kevin, right? It's no longer, you don't go down and have a 2-hour whiteboard session with the entire, buying team, right? Or people, to your point, Will, are on LinkedIn or subreddits, or they're in Slack communities, or they're looking at YouTube videos or whatever it may be. And so that distribution, not just of the actual physically where people are, which has changed how folks buy, but also just the access to all this content and how much more digitally native everyone is. Obviously, COVID changed a lot, but I think one thing is we're all more comfortable sitting at home doing things digitally, right? That's changing how folks want to interact with you. And that's a really interesting way to think about this new buyer's journey. So,
and maybe the next was like, well, a thing that I think you all did really well was you developed all this content that, like, again, even before I got to know you, I had seen your content get shared into my feed again and again. And one of the things that I'd love to hear from you, because it's a thing that I think brands tend to mess up in the early days of like creating like highly like clickable and shareable headlines and content, while still maintaining and building a brand that folks are willing to trust and say, yes, I want to put you in front of your product in front of my customers. How did you guys kind of like pull between those two things?
So a lot of it is a byproduct of how we were sort of born in a lot of ways. So when we came about, it was 2020, mid peak or whatever you want to call it, COVID. And like we were looking at, and we're in the midst of pivoting our technology effectively from marketing software into a sales tech tool. And we saw Slack communities popping up left and right related to getting sellers together, having conversations. And I remember Rev Genius in particular jumping in there. And every time I try to talk about what we do, I got my wrist slapped. And so our content strategy was actually shaped in large part by us getting our wrist slapped talking about ourselves. And we had to take this approach of, well, let's just teach them how we would do it. Like basically, like how would you do it without our software? And then hopefully they recognize that our software just makes it easier. And so that's really where it was born out of. And then, putting on the COO hat, you post once to LinkedIn and you see the installs go boop. Next day you don't post, they go boop. And you're like, We should do more of that.
How that's super interesting. I love that part of your story. Just I'll call it the correlation to your LinkedIn posts, right? But you also mentioned something that's fascinating, which is this idea of people are now in all these Slack groups,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's really interesting too. Just that, like, again, this idea of the way that information is being transferred is a totally different world, right? And Kevin, you see this obviously with your open source community, right? As something where you've got how many GitHub stars, right? I don't know, too many. Not too many. You can never have too many. So what? I guess maybe one thing to kind of start getting a bit deeper, as we've kind of talked through how this has changed, you both gave your perspective. What does that mean in terms of how you've had to adapt your sales and marketing processes, right? I'm sure it's more complex, Will, than simply posting every day on LinkedIn, though that's one of your suggestions. By all means, put it out there. But would love to hear.
No need for a marketing team, just post.
Yeah, exactly.
It only takes like 2 years to actually generate any revenue that matters. So like just make sure you like have other plans too.
Okay. So maybe go. I don't know who wants to go first, but just have you kind of seen that your processes adapt from that CLO position? What are you looking to do, and how do you help guide the org through those changes?
Yeah, and this is maybe slightly less related to a lot of the market shifts that have happened in the last 3-4 years, but I think just broadly in general, like I will try not to get on my soapbox of how like critical open source is to just any company, one, like selling to developers, but also just any organization at large. But having a the content engine, the open source engines are beautiful mirrors of one another, where open source for us is both like a distribution engine of, hey, how do we make sure that we are in more sales cycles? So if we imagine, we build this product called Next.js, it has become kind of the de facto standard for how the way you build a modern web application. All of those users, even kind of like the React or like JavaScript ecosystems at large, we think about those like part of our funnel. And so by investing at the very top end of that thing, we know that over long periods of time, like that is potential energy that we can consume over the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months. And so we have this great distribution engine, not only for just getting in front of the right prospects, or say, hey, if you're using our open source product, it's highly likely that you're going to consume from us, but two, in terms of like market shaping. And so I think this is where I think it becomes this really nice mirror of the content strategy of getting folks to think about their problems through the lens that our organization is hyper opinionated about. Make sure that when they do kind of come to solve that problem, they rock up and they say, oh, hey, I wanted to build a web application. Of course, it needs to be headless. Or, on the Lavender side, like, hey, I need to make sure that I'm building an outbound motion that is putting like high intent messaging in front of folks. On the common side, I only want to talk to folks who are willing and able to consume from me because they're engaged with my community. All those pieces of like ratchet together really nicely in terms of shaping the market to consume your products, which is kind of that 95% of the sales cycle is now hidden. It's that work, and it's finding great demand gen folks, it's finding great product marketing folks, and great performance marketing folks to help get your stuff in front of folks to then funnel the more traditional sales motion.
One of the things that we found really early on, Kevin, I'm curious if you're seeing this too, is like the content that we were putting out and all the resources that we were investing in. It actually ended up turning into a bit of a scaled CS in the early days, where you don't need to ask me for my opinion on your email because like I've already written about it, right? I'm curious with open source communities, has that had a similar kind of impact and role where people can get self-started with it and you don't have to necessarily handhold as much?
Both in terms of we have folks who are showing up with completely baked usage of our products. I think open source is a great seed for that. But also one of our early mantras at actually several companies I've worked at, but also at Vercel, was reply with a link, which I love that you've kind of framed as a CS scaling tool, where we would always want to say, hey, here's an example of that thing. Here's documentation either from our side or something from the community where you're like helping feed that machine, where you really want to make sure that folks don't feel like they're going it alone, because it both builds a lot of credibility for your product. We're like, oh wow, there's 100,000 people, it's a million. There's a million people also working on this thing with me. Oh, cool! Like I'm not alone in betting on this technology. And so I think it's both like it scales your CS teams. You kind of break that linearity of, hey, every 1,000 tickets you need a new customer success engineer, but also you were helping build credibility in that adoption cycle by saying, hey, look, you're not alone. There is resourcing for you. There are people around here.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think what you're both talking about, and I love, is this idea of, I joke, it's like there's this new like trust paradigm, essentially, right? No one, personally, like I don't want to go to someone's website. No offense to my marketing team that spends a lot of time, making sure our website's converting, right?
Yeah.
But like that's kind of like that last step back to the 5% conversation. But how do you initially educate yourself? How do you initially understand what's going on there? And you're going to these, different places, right? Whether it be LinkedIn and understanding what you're saying, or whether it be, in your case, Kevin, your peers in the open source community that you trust. And, I think in consumer marketing, it's called influencer marketing, but like that, it's kind of that like same concept, right? I don't think people will call it that much in like B2B marketing, which I know is the world that we all live in, but there's still that idea of like, if someone who I really respect as a developer is talking about this tool, then I'm going to go check it out. If someone who I really respect as a sales leader is saying, hey, you should look into something like Lavender because it's going to get you a 20% conversion rate, right? You're like, oh yeah, I'll definitely go check that out. And so I think those are all really interesting points as to, again, this like kind of modern buyer's journey.
Yeah. And maybe to talk about kind of the baton pass off, where I think we've all kind of like open source content marketing is all like kind of the front half of the funnel. I think I've talked about it publicly a couple of times, but maybe worth repeating here. The way in which you actually engage with that inbound pipeline, I think, has also changed.
Yeah.
Where in the very early days of Vercel, actually my first hire was my head of RevOps, where I wanted to work with this person who had a huge amount of skill in terms of managing huge amounts of noise and identifying the signal on my products like Common Room weren't out yet, or when I was popular yet. And so we had to DIY a bunch of this stuff. But the way in which we handle that inbound intent then is we created this like function called product advocates. We actually stole this from the Auth0 team, where what we wanted to do is build a functioning inbound SDR team that was going to be not gold necessarily like enterprise opportunities created for the sales team, but instead was going to be gold on KPIs or health metrics around how are we making sure that inbound request lands in the right bucket. Customer or prospect reaches out and says, hey, I'm having this type of issue. Do we send them the documentation? Do we send them to support? Do we send them to to our self-serve product and say, hey, this fits your bucket? Or actually, you do have a problem that's complex and you need to buy our enterprise, offering. I think that especially in terms like you have folks who are coming in with probably a pretty positive view of you, giving them like as they're going through like nearing their buying stages and saying, hey, like if you're ready to buy, I will sell you, no worries at all. But if you're not quite ready, I can allow you to sit in that education phase longer because I know I have this really nice self-feeding cycle of open source and content that keeps them coming back, such that then when they are ready to buy, we say, awesome, let's go. And we can like fly them through and we have really short sales cycles because of that. And so again, go ahead.
Oh, no,
I think because of that, we have like, when you look at a lot of our sales efficiency metrics, and again, all the credit goes to like the RevOps team and our sales leadership team, like our team runs a really efficient sales cycle, mostly because we're pretty well baked by the time that they come to our door. In the modern market, we're doing a lot more outbound, but I think when we think about this sort of motion, it's such a strong fit to have kind of these like softer inbound funnels that are going to be, again, self-perpetuating.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll let you chime in here, Will, but what you're saying is, and to kind of tie it into this idea of, I guess, the actual topic of our webinar, right? To get there is, how do you build pipeline and what are these new intent signals, right? And your point is that there's a lot we can do now as you think about the modern buying journey to understand the intent and context of what someone's trying to do. And if you meet them with the correct response, whether that be your SDRs, whether that be, more, I'll call it scaled programs that marketing can run, that creates a better, value realization and like mesh between the organizations that ultimately can create a relationship, right? So I think that's an interesting point. Will, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about this is like, Kevin, some of the things you're talking about were topics that were brought up by HubSpot back in like 2016 when they were talking about like the inbound sales rep and like what that actually looks like to work in concert with marketing. And marketing in this case can also be product. It can also be community. It can also be how other folks are engaging with this. One of the things that came to mind as you were talking about like this trust paradigm shift is something we've taken really seriously, which is like we've just like as a company policy, we will not be paying people to ever post about our product. And the reason being is like as soon as you know that some folks are talking about it and they're being paid to do so, all of a sudden they're like there's a weird incentive shift and you start to lose trust in whatever that resource is. And so it's like something we value so much. It's like it's a feedback loop of is the product doing what it's supposed to do? If it is, then this will continue to replicate. But yeah, Kevin, I'm curious like that. It's almost like a market development rep, right? Where you're just like helping triage where they need to be within the sales process. How are you setting up the incentives for them for that? Just like people situated and the KPI?
I mean, this is a time about like give like the pure gloss. Oh, Vercel, we've always been perfect. We get everything right every single time. We've screwed this up so many times. Where in the early days we tried having really obtuse goals, or said, "Hey, we all share the same number. Everybody, in the organization, you share, KVG and Guillermo's numbers." And that worked to some extent, but then what we ended up finding out is when folks, because you look at your comp plan a lot in terms of like, what's my North Star? How am I contributing to the business? They'd say, hey, like, I know what I do every day, but I'm not quite sure how that ladders up into like that top line, revenue number or active developer number, whatever it may be. And we had started actually just breaking it down chunk by chunk. And again, like we get like this specific of each department, but the thing that I think was our saving grace is we built a lot of trust between the team of anytime that they felt like they were doing something that was either counter to their comp plan that was going to be better for the business, or the inverse of that should be like all their antibodies should go off, all their alarm bells should ring off, and they should like raise their hand and say, hey, Kev, something is wrong. Like, I shouldn't close this deal at a 50% discount. It's bad for the business long term, but it really helps me meet my number, or I shouldn't be doing X or Y. And then we held back some budget to say we'll make the decisions good for the business, and then we'll true up that person. Say, okay, for the next version of the comp plan, we do want to incentivize multi-year deals, or we do want to incentivize bringing in a partner to a deal, or whatever those things are, to make sure that we are fitting the line to the curve, maybe in a clumsy way over time, but getting closer to the plan that like aligns how we pay folks to what the business goals are. But we've screwed it up a whole bunch of times in a row, and I appreciate my team's patience as we are doing mid-cycle comp plan adjustments of like, I'm so sorry, we got this wrong. Can we do this instead?
Yeah, that's cool. It's cool to hear.
Well, I know there's some questions coming in, so wanted to transition over to that. Appreciate the insights. And so for everyone listening, if you have questions, please put them into the ask a question box there. But I want to start first with Ethan had a great question. I'll read it off. How do you approach the complex and multifaceted task of building a robust pipeline that is aligned with the company's mission, vision, values, and objectives? So I think we kind of touched on this a bit with the last kind of area that you were both talking about, or that we were talking about, which is how do you, let's not just have your SDRs, as I say, be like, hammer nail. Someone came inbound, set up a meeting, right? It's really understanding what, in your case, Kevin, Vercel, how do you want to think about that, right? Or Will, you mentioned let's not pay people. Let's actually build true product advocates that we can have go out there and like tell our story. And so I think that's the main thing is like my summary of what you said, but I want you all to chime in, is like you have to have trust in your product and in your process, and then think about what is what is the way that you feel like your buyers want to engage with you, and figure out the right alignment to that versus simply saying, well, in my last job, we had SDRs. So I'm going to hire a bunch of SDRs and they're going to hammer everyone. Right. I think that's, I joke, if it was easy, someone would write a playbook and every company would go public. Right. That's why you change your comp plans every 6 months, Kevin, because it's not easy. And so you've got to adjust to it. So anything you want to add there? I think it was a great question from Ethan.
Will, anything? So I can give you my riff if you want, but I'd love to hear your side as well.
It's a bit data and it's a bit gut feel of what when you start to add in like mission and values, right? So like not paying people, right? There's definitely a short-term benefit that we would see of like spikes of downloads, spikes of postings, etc. But one of the things that we thought through is like long-term, does that like disincentivize the right behaviors and disincentivize like the entire system that's making this work, right? So it's a cost benefit sort of analysis that you just kind of have to run, and sometimes like the numbers aren't all there and you just have to make a decision without all the information at hand. That's my answer on it.
I think there's two major like facets. So I think one is to your point, I think the numbers are important where for example, I think there are like so many useless SaaS statistics that folks kind of throw around where like it helps them feel like they understand their business. A lot of times those end up being really great like relative measurements, either to yourself quarter over quarter or region over region. I was chatting with some of the early team at Segment, and one of the things they talked about like that they used for identifying where do we have an advantage that we should lean into was essentially like CAC to LTV by region, where you say CAC to LTV is like a silly metric in the early days because you're doing a bunch of unnatural things, you're hiring, way ahead of scale and all this other stuff. But what's really useful was saying, oh, wow, our cost of acquiring customer in region X that is renewing and expanding with an NDR of 190%. Like this, it's really cheap to acquire. Like let's lean into maybe the US market or the DACH region or whatever it may be, and using that as a way to like essentially as you start to look at, there's a lot more pressure on efficiency now, like where capital is a lot more expensive for us to acquire, it's a lot more dilutive. And so those are ways to start to think about, again, like on the second half of that question, like market volatility, regulatory changes, these sorts of pieces. On the other half, in terms of like vision, mission, objectives, being really crisp, and like this is like where again we as the COOs get to blame the CEO and say, hey, it's up to your CEO to be really crisp about this is where the company's going in 10 years, this is where the company's going in 5 years, and the customers we want to be powering and enabling look like this. And then our job, right, is go out and identify, okay, how do we get into that market? Yeah. And anytime folks are saying, hey, this is not accretive to our business and vision long term, we start to shut those channels down, or we say maybe let's adjust the vision. But that, I think that becomes a big CEO problem.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking it's a great point to, this idea of like intent and context, right? You can really understand, okay, what is someone talking about? What do they really care about? What is, the context of their questions, and use tools. I'll do a quick infomercial like Common Room, right? To help you understand who are these people? What are they saying? Are they in your ICP? Are they in DACH as an example? We'll do an acronym lesson later. But are they in DACH and, and they're talking about XYZ, which we know we can help them with, and now use that context, pump it into a tool like Lavender, and you can send a better email, right? Like it all can kind of come together in that way. And so I think it's that focus, right, that ultimately becomes really helpful to your business. Okay, a couple other questions I want to make sure we hit. So Brianna had a question around shortening sales cycles with the use of communities. So I can, quickly, Common Room, helps power a lot of great communities. And so everything from, OpenAI. So if you want to talk about really fad, buzzword stuff, OpenAI runs their community using Common Room, and even really fast growing companies like Vercel. But we look across, hundreds and hundreds of communities, and we can tell you that, on average, we see a 20 to 30% faster close rate when someone's engaged in your community. And I think, Kevin, you probably have some anecdotes you could say there, and Will, I guess also not, but like Kevin, you already mentioned it a bit, right? That like your team is nurturing people in this process, right? This is how we got on the SDR topic. And then once they get out, or once they're ready with that intent and context that you can manage, they can close more quickly.
I feel like we could give like an entire another 2-hour webinar on this topic. But yeah, anecdotally, I think one, Vercel exists because of its community, full stop, period. That we, our early products were in a hyper competitive field, but it was really because I think a lot of people, right, individuals, indie developers said, hey, I believe in the thing that Vercel is trying to will into the universe. And Recite at the time, and that thing, not even was our close rate higher, or was our sales cycle shorter, we would have never been in any of these deals. And now that we look at our ability to actually have gone large cap enterprise really quickly, was predicated on again, where our community is the thing that unlocked it, where we had folks who said, hey, I've now moved to some XYZ Fortune 5 company. We now want to use Vercel and Next.js because of my exposure and my time spent, thinking about Vercel and personal projects, thinking about Next.js and personal projects. And so, yeah, maybe again, our demand gen, our marketing does incredible work, but also our open source community, they drive the bus for us.
And Will, weren't you named LinkedIn's top sales influencer, which is basically just says that LinkedIn basically says you're the ultimate sales community person.
I got a nice little tag from them for that one.
You get a little plaque or anything? They send you a little.
They did send me.
I'm hoping it's a giant trophy.
I got a.
Okay, nice.
You got a pillow. Nice.
Yeah. Little dog pillow. I love that point about we're getting into deals that we wouldn't have any business getting into. You brought up a segment and what they were doing in the early days. We have them as a client as well, and we wouldn't have gotten them had it not been for the conversations we were starting online. It created something that was bigger than what we actually were, in a lot of ways. And so there's
so many planes on the runway of there's so many companies in your ear telling you, oh, buy this thing, do this thing, that the only way to cut through it, I think, is by these very human connections of, hey, I'm building this thing, or when I ping you all after this and say, hey, you mentioned this thing, I'm dealing with this problem, and when you recommend a product to me, I can nearly guarantee you I'm going to go get into that sales cycle with them. Right. But by no action of their own, but instead of again, we all sit in the same sales community, go to market community, etc.
Yeah, everyone's got this big push for efficiency as part of their growth, right? And you think about, let's say the sales cycle for community-led and non-community-led is the exact same length. The amount of time that they're actually with the seller and that community-led is going to feel ridiculously fast because they're already ready by the time they get to the end.
Well, we also, I'll just tell you, it's not just the sales cycle, but we've also been able to show, with data across, in public large companies, that if they're engaged in your community, and we have a broad aperture for community, right? So that's if they're engaging in a subreddit, if they're looking at YouTube, right? It's not just LinkedIn or your Discord channel as an example, but the ACV is also significantly higher.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, it gets back to this, I'll call it the trust paradigm. That's my new buzz phrase I coined today, right? Where if you've had a great experience, you've talked to your peers, you've, not got beat over the head by the SDR from Vercel, and you're like, hey, I actually this is working, right? And I want you're going to move more quickly, and you're less inclined to negotiate because you've bought into the fact it can solve your problems versus trying to hedge it, right?
Yeah. Back to Kevin's point earlier, right? It shapes the mindset. And so I think about with our product, a lot of times, our deal, I imagine this would be a similar sort of you get a limited scope to start, and then it expands out. Yeah. And so thinking about like from a community led, they're like already bought in. You get that expanded scope from the get go.
Yep.
And maybe to answer the second half of Ethan's question from earlier about how do you measure the like effectiveness of issuing your pipeline, I think this is like where if like your community is working really well, all the quality metrics, because I mean like at the end of the day, I don't want to speak for y'all, but at least the way I work with my marketing teams is say, hey, like your top line number is pipeline, whether it's floating pipeline or total pipeline created, and then the quality metrics are the way in which we like measure how well is our content marketing or our community working, where we say, okay, like for $50 million in floating pipeline, what was the close rate? What was the cycle length? Where did folks fall off with like stage 1 to stage 2, stage 2 to stage 3? What were the places that things were breaking? And then using those quality control metrics and then debug, hey, like, yeah, we got $50 million worth of pipeline, but it was of inferior quality. And so maybe something upstream is going wrong. And so that's where we always continue to like go back to like, because I mean, you could buy a lead list of 100 million names, spam everyone, maybe open up a bunch of sales cycles, and if you call it all stage 1, sure, like you've got a bunch of open pipeline. But the way in which you continue to like hold the organization accountable to building a healthy economic engine for the business is by looking at those kind of QC metrics. And then either I don't know if your board's bugging about this stuff, you can shoot me a note afterwards and I can give you like specifics. But like that's kind of how we start to debug like, are we building a healthy pipeline, and are we building again like a healthy community ahead of that?
Yeah. Well, that's where you can bring all sorts of interesting signals too, to your point, right? Whether that be product usage signals in like the PLG space, or whether it be, these intent and context signals that we've talked about a bit, right? To really understand, the reality is, no offense to any salespeople out there, but qualification in stage 1 or stage 2 is only so good, right? So, okay. I know that we're probably on time. So last question will be, any tips for growing earned channels like LinkedIn? Will, this is all you. You are the LinkedIn master. Show them your pillow and then give us your wisdom.
Hello, covered in dog hair.
Yeah, perfect.
So I think of earned channels as a few like core things. One, you have to understand what it is that you're going to own, right? Like I think a lot of people come to LinkedIn and just like kind of scatter plot and go a lot of different directions. One of the most important things is to like own your niche. And so when I first came on, like there's like 2 like core things that I wanted to bring to the niche that was cold email, and that was actual data, because that wasn't getting shared, and then the buyer's perspective, because we tend to always approach this from the perspective of the like person writing the message, like, oh, make sure you talk about your value props a certain way, but nobody was talking about like, hey, your buyer is actually spending like 10 seconds reading your email on average at all. So all this time, effort, and energy you're putting into messaging, like your formatting is actually 10x more important. And so like showcasing that, backing up with data, but then just like painfully ruthless consistency of like continuously doing it and like focusing on it. Now, obviously, if it's a channel where like there's not any sort of like success, or like, I don't know, like front end engineers, maybe they don't spend a ton of time on LinkedIn. So like investing in that earned channel like might not make a ton of sense. And so like going back to like thinking about what's the word I'm looking for? Like why are you on LinkedIn? Right? Well, maybe it's recruiting. And thusly, like your content strategy of what you're focusing on in that earned media channel is very different. So like for us, we know salespeople live on LinkedIn. And so it's a great place for us to share content and have conversations with would-be users.
We talk about it a lot, working with companies like all of you that have a similar strategy where we call it meet your users where they are, or like where are their watering holes, right? So if you're talking to sales or marketing, probably it's, LinkedIn for the sake of it. Whereas if you're, working with developers, it's, you've got GitHub repos, or you're in Stack Overflow, or you're in, like those places where the persona that you're trying to reach is going to ultimately, quote, hang out. And then how can you meet them with a value prop to your point, not just, give them something that's actually interesting and that's going to pique their interest, to try to like pull them in slowly over time. So, okay. Well, any last thoughts? I know we're coming up on time here, so I want to wrap. Kevin, I feel like you got one thing you want to see. I see.
Oh, I'm sorry. You leave like a comment, because I think like it ties all this stuff together so nicely.
Yeah.
Where so the best advice I'd gotten from a friend, Poke was like super successful guy, and one of the things I was like, hey, how do we build like a successful business, and kind of like all these things that are I think we're training, we kind of like fall into that same funnel, just like that focus of both like management time and attention, as well as like focus of like where all the like what gets behind the arrow for the way in which you're going to market. And the thing I'll add is like when you said like, hey, why are you on LinkedIn? One of the things we ended up doing, to go back to like to Ethan's question from earlier, we got really crisp about like we want to be working with companies in XYZ vertical in this region. Again, like we named cities, that at this stage, this buying entity, and then because of that, then we could say, okay, what are their watering holes and what are the messages that are going to be important to them? Because a CIO of a Fortune 50 company in Middle America might have a radically different set of concerns than one sitting in, Australia or in China or wherever it may be.
Yeah. Or a startup in San Francisco, if you're like,
totally. And so, it's why I'm excited to be on this panel with y'all, is that like your offerings help make that process a lot easier. Where again, it's so easy to screw this stuff up, that having just, rails are incredibly effective.
I love it. Well, with that, thanks everyone for tuning in and for all the great questions. Hopefully you enjoyed the discussion, and most of all, want to thank Kevin and Will for joining me today on this Tuesday morning. If you'd like to hear more of the webinar, you'll definitely be getting a link via email. And then obviously, if you want to continue the conversation with Kevin, Will, or myself, LinkedIn, I think, is our watering hole, right?
I was going to say contact sales through Vercel.com.
Yeah.
Work with a large enterprise agreement, and then, hey, I'm York. No, I'll fly out and hang out. But no, I guess LinkedIn works too.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone, and look forward to hopefully talking to you all.